Welcome to Sacred Treks, a show where we take Star Trek as a sacred text to see what life lessons we can take away from the franchise in order to help make us better people. So for today's episode, let's explore the Star Trek The Original Series episode, The Conscience of Kings, through the theme of identity. This is Sacred Treks.
Space, the final frontier.
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 It does not matter that we will never reach our ultimate goal. The effort yields its own rewards.
A human being dead.
A single act of compassion can put you in touch with your own humanity.
Loss of life is to be mourned, but only if the life was wasted. My child's was not.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us.
Your father was captain of a starship for 12 minutes.
He saved 800 lives.
I dare you to do better.
You're a Starfleet captain. You believe in service, sacrifice, compassion, and love.
The past is written, but the future is left for us to write. And we have powerful tools, Rios. Openness, optimism, and the spirit of curiosity.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one.
These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise.
Its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
As usual, let's start off, as always, with the synopsis for The Conscience of the King. You know, that section where I make a sarcastic summation of the plot of the episode, in order to remind us that while we are all taking Star Trek as sacred, and it's something that we all love, it is not a perfect work because, you know, nothing is. We open with Captain Kirk watching a production of Macbeth with a childhood friend, Leighton. You'd think in the 23rd century theater troupes would be able to afford more than a cardboard set, but maybe it's nostalgic. And also, I guess considering that the Enterprise is made out of cardboard sets as well, we'll let it slide. It turns out that Leighton lied to Kirk about having a synthetic food cure for a famine to get Kirk to come watch this play with him. Couldn't have just said, you know, hey, it's been a bit, haven't seen you, friend. Also, I think this guy who killed half of our friends in our childhood is still alive and in a really low-budget Shakespeare company, which honestly seems like a fitting enough punishment. You see, Leighton insists that the actor playing Macbeth, Anton Carden, the leader of the theater troupe, is actually Kodos the Executioner. Not that Kodos, different Kodos. The governor of Tarsus IV 20 years earlier, who slew half of the colony's population in order to save the other half from starvation, and who was thought to have been burned to death after that incident. So basically, Kodos is Star Trek's Thanos, which I guess that makes Kirk Ant-Man? Turns out Kirk and Leighton were part of the half that survived Kodos' massacre, and Kirk, after finding the actor Carden looks like Kodos, and that Carden doesn't have records from before 20 years ago, the same time that Kodos was supposed to have died, Kirk goes down to Leighton's barely attended cocktail party to try to trap the actor. But Kirk is gonna Kirk, so he chooses to instead start hitting on Carden's daughter, Lenore. Also, we learn that she played Lady Macbeth to Carden's Macbeth, which is kind of weird considering that they're father and daughter, not husband and wife, but, you know, whatever, actor's gonna act. But before Kirk can charm the young woman, Kirk finds that Leighton has been murdered. See, I'm acting. Like a Shakespeare acting. I'm acting. Kirk delays the ship meant to take the acting troupe to their next destination so that he can take them in the Enterprise instead. Kirk gaslights Lenore by pretending he doesn't want to take them, but ultimately does so in exchange for a performance for the crew on the Enterprise. Quack? I said Quack because I mixed up Kirk and Spock. That's apparently my ship name for Kirk / Spock, Quack. Spock questions the course change, but of course Kirk does his noticeable brooding. Kirk finds that only 9 people could have visually identified Kodos, and 7 of them are dead, and of the other 2, one is Kirk himself, and the other just so happens to be, out of the entire Federation, Lieutenant Riley. Remember Lieutenant Riley, that guy who was ranting about women's rights way back in the Naked time?
Yes, sir.
Now that's what I like. Let the women work too. Universal suffrage.
Report to sick bay, Mr. Riley.
Sick bay? exactly where I was heading. Sir.
Gotta love Lieutenant Riley. Kirk transfers Riley to engineering, presumably to protect him, but Spock questions Kirk's mindset while McCoy tries to get Spock drunk.
Would you care for a drink, Mr. Spock?
My father's race was spared the dubious benefits of alcohol.
Oh. Now I know why they were conquered.
Kirk meets with Lenore, who gives him the least subtle hints of all time.
And the ship. All this power surging and throbbing, yet under control. Are you like that, Captain?
Oh, I'm so getting laid tonight. Though Kirk also tries to get information about her father out of her, which also feels kind of weird considering that means he's hitting on her under false pretenses, but I guess we'll just gloss over that stuff. Meanwhile, Spock on his own figures out the history of Kodos and spouts exposition to McCoy.
And that was when Governor Kodos seized full power and declared emergency martial law.
I've heard of it.
You may not have heard it all.
Aboard, Lieutenant Riley, in typical Riley fashion, asks Uhura to play him a love song, while he is poisoned with Windex, apparently. With Lieutenant Riley on death's door, Spock and McCoy confront Kirk about his mission and the possibility of being murdered. And it's right then that there is an overloaded phaser that appears in Kirk's office. Kirk survives the assassination attempt and goes to confront Carden. Carden states that he is an actor, dammit, and could be Kodos if Kirk wishes it. So many K names in this video. Kirk, Kodos, Carden, Kirk asks Carden to read a line in order to compare a recorded voice file of Kodos. Now, why the 23rd century simply couldn't use DNA, I have no idea, but, you know, cardboard chips, remember? The two argue about memory and stuff, and then Kirk threatens Carden, because he's the captain and can apparently do that.
If I had gotten everything I wanted, you might not walk out of this room alive.
Lenore interrupts, saying that there's no mercy in Kirk, and Kirk states that if Carden is Kodos, Kirk's shown him more mercy than he deserves. When Lenore asks, who the hell is he to say what harm was done, Kirk quietly responds,
What do I have to be?
Riley, having now recovered, escapes sickbay and sneaks backstage to kill Carden. Kirk talks Riley down, but Carden recognizes Riley and Kirk's voice. He tells his daughter that Riley's voice is a voice from the past that haunts him, causing Lenore to admit that she killed all the other witnesses. Carden, is horrified by this, and Lenore attempts to kill Kirk, but Carden jumps in front of the beam, killing himself. Lenore has a psychotic break while quoting Shakespeare because it's all a reference, get it? It's all supposed to be a Shakespearean tragedy in this episode. The episode ends with McCoy asking Kirk if he liked Lenore, and Kirk responds by jumping to warp.
You really cared for her, didn't you?
Ahead, warp factor 1, Mr. Leslie.
Which is honestly a weird coda for this episode to end on, but I guess every episode's gotta end with a rumination on Kirk's romantic life, rather than the actual themes at play. Alright, now let's take a look at this episode through the theme of identity. So in all honesty, this was a really hard episode to decide a theme for. There's themes of revenge, the ends justifying the means, and deception, all wrapped up in a truly excellent episode of the original series that intentionally, as I said before, evokes a Shakespearean tragedy. But I ultimately decided to go with the theme of identity because I think of the most poignant line in the episode.
Captain Kirk, who are you to say what harm was done?
What do I have to be?
Who do I have to be? As we eventually learn, Kirk is a victim of Kodos' abuse, one of the survivors of the Tantalus colony, and Kirk clearly suffers from some level of PTSD from the event. And I mean, who wouldn't have PTSD after that? Even if he doesn't bring it up again on the show because, 1960s episodic TV. Yet, Kirk doesn't throw that trauma in Lenore's face when she asks who he is to say what harm had been done. He simply states, who do I have to be? Identity, even just the word identity, has become one of the most highly politicized ideas in today's modern world. We talk endlessly as a culture, and especially here on YouTube, about ideas of identity politics, where we discuss how the cross-sections of our identity are at the forefront of our political, social, and economic choices, as well as how our identity affects how we are treated by society and political pressures. And most especially, how those of certain identities are oppressed by and actively suffering under systemic social inequalities. For an obvious example, I discuss on this channel quite often how my identity as a transgender person has influenced me and my life, both in positive ways and in how society has treated me and how individuals treat me worse because of that identity as well. And to my mind, these types of discussions are critically important to our discourse when we discuss social and political issues. Seeing these things through the lens of identity, as well as how different identities intersect with people and groups, offers us a valuable lens to understand how society affects the most vulnerable, and gives benefits to those who are less vulnerable based on their identity. Yet, often in these discussions, it's left to those whose identities are most directly harmed by something to be the ones who have to speak up for it. Trans people, for example, are sometimes left alone to talk about the discrimination they face in things like healthcare or housing or simply getting a job. Yet, going back to the original series, Kirk in this moment, despite being someone who is directly harmed by Kodos, doesn't take that identity for himself. He simply asks this question: who do I have to be? And the answer is, he doesn't have to be anyone in order to speak up against injustice. He doesn't have to be a victim to speak out against the harm that was caused by Kodos' horrific actions. In fact, it is often those who are victims that are least able to prosecute. And in this situation, Kirk himself was the victim and is in a position of power, and even he is somewhat helpless to do anything in this moment. In real life, trans people are often the ones with the least political, social, and economic power in order to stand up against those who discriminate against them. Trans people often make less money, which means they are less able to afford a lawyer or go to court or have time to go to court. Sometimes we need someone who is more distant, more farther away from us, who has more political, social, and economic power in order to stand up for us. Something that Kirk tries to do, even though he was also himself a victim. He tries to identify and take a distanced stance and try to look at things objectively, yet he also understands that a lot of his emotion is coming from him being a victim. Yet this is a difficult line to walk. For if someone is too distant, they run the risk of not truly understanding and feeling that the harm was caused. It's why it's so important to listen to the voices of those who are harmed. Many times people feel like they can't talk about issues that affect trans people or people of color because they'll get yelled at for taking on an issue. And so many people just don't say anything at all because of this silly fear. But the real reason that people get upset is that people get talked over. That they don't get listened to when they have something to say about the very real persecution that they face. It's why I share my stories as a trans person, so people can understand my point of view, so they have an opportunity to listen to what people who are trans struggle with, can understand both the joys and the pain that transgender people face in that identity. And you, can go out and share those ideas so others can understand and recognize when harm is done. And it's why I, for example, as a white person, try to do my best to listen to communities of color and hear what has affected them, and yet still try to discuss issues that they face within those communities on my channel because I have a platform to do so, because I have a voice that sometimes unfortunately gets heard louder by certain people in society because I am, again, white. But I also always have to make sure that I am not overshadowing the voices that need to be heard in specific situations. I wrote and shot this video before all the recent protests that happened in the United States around people of color and police brutality. But I think that these issues and the things that I talked about earlier in this video that I filmed earlier a few weeks ago are still prescient, if not more prescient today. Kirk in this episode is trying to be both of these things at the same time. The man who listens to the pain of others but tries to look at it from a distance. But a man who must also recognize his own emotional investment in the situation. It's a difficult, and honestly it's an impossible line to walk. And sadly, to be honest, the end of this episode doesn't resolve this struggle, instead opting for a twist ending. But perhaps that's for the best, because truly, there is no resolution to questions and these struggles. We just have to keep moving forward and attempt to do our best to try to be heard and also make sure we listen. And most importantly, after we listen, we fight for those who need it most. That's what Star Trek has always tried to do. Let identities' voices be heard, even through metaphor, so that we can all hear the stories of those who have been harmed and learn how best to fight for them.
Who are you to say what harm was done?
What do I have to be?
That's it for this episode of Sacred Treks. I'd like to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. Please let me know what you think of The Conscience of the Kings. It's one of my favorite episodes of the original series, even if I don't particularly love the ending, the twist ending that sort of glosses over some of the harder issues that are in the episode. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and if you want to help make this channel even better, don't forget to give to my Patreon page. It really helps me out over there. But regardless if you subscribe or give to my Patreon page, I just hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Patrons, it is time to assemble! Catherine Lambeth, Miranda Janelle, Ashley Allen, Bokikio, Eli Bergmoss, Ashlyn Solstice, John Cool, Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Chamomile T, Randy Thompson, Wellington Marcus, Boyd Earl, and Mary Beth Earl, Stephen Schuhart, Wayne Twitchell, Auntie Kate, 808, Rick Osborne, Dominic Noble, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, John Steele, Meadow Whisperer, Gavin Robinson, Michael Beam, Munir Amlani, BBD, Jason Knott, Hannah F, Andrew K, Bree Beecher, Jasmine, Sky Skinner, Maeve, Skylar Gray, Flynn Nathan Steele, Tiffany Danger, Sean Piper, Geek Filter, Jane Packard, Wen Dizzle Bizzle. Why do I do this to myself? Sarah Bystem, James Karate, Jacob Tovar, W. Randy, Edie, Mari Neckar, Bush, Celestial Dawn, Din, Mark the Edge, Pissed and Twisted Garage, Lily, Polly Mina, Laura Demo, Liza, Nikki, Gordon, Bloomfield, Andrew, Lamaro, Zone 1 Librarian, Jenny Mabel, Michael Hardy, and finally, Corey Honkanen and Vale. Done. Alright, not my best patron rap, but I figured it would still be fun for you to see all my failure on screen, immortalized in every video this month. Also, I know I mixed Captain America and Superwoman. Deal with it. But thank you, honestly, to all my patrons. I really appreciate all of you, and you really mean a lot to me. I would not be able to do this without you. Thank you so much for supporting me being an absolute dork and weirdo. I wish you all the best.